The ticket I booked, my boarding pass, my flight number, even the flat white I had in the lounge, all of them were from Qantas. So why then am I sat here on a Finnair A330 operated by Finnair staff, flown by Finnair pilots, when I actually paid for and booked my ticket with Qantas? If you do find yourself in this situation, you're probably just experiencing what's called a wet lease, which is what Qantas are currently doing with Finnair in this situation for the flight I'm on today. But what exactly is a wet lease? How does it differ from a damp lease? Yes, that is actually a thing. Which airline benefits in this whole agreement? And if you're the customer and you've booked Qantas and you turn up and you get Finnair, should you be happy with that? What's the difference then between a wet lease and a dry lease? One way to think about it is, say you're on holiday and you need to get from A to B and you think you might use a car to do that. First of all, you could go to a hire car company. In that case, they give you the car, but you're the one who's driving it, you're the one who's responsible to fuel it up, and you need to safely get it to your destination. That would be the same as a dry lease. The only thing that's being provided to you is the car, or in aviation's case, obviously, the aircraft. Now, a wet lease is when you can't be bothered to do all of that and you just want to instantly get from A to B and make it someone else's responsibility entirely. Think of it like jumping in a taxi or grabbing an Uber. In this case, not only do you get the car, but you get someone to drive it for you. They're then responsible for the insurance, they're responsible to make sure it's fueled up, and they're the one who has to do all the planning in terms of how you get there. Now that, because you get everything included with it, is a wet lease. And Qantas are using this wet leasing option to cover capacity on some of their popular routes, whilst they're waiting for their own new aircraft to become available. Now we'll talk about the pros and cons for both airlines on an arrangement like this in a moment, but one option Qantas have in this relationship is in the future to convert that wet lease into a dry one. So converting their Uber into a hire car, basically keeping the Finnair aircraft but utilising its own flight and cabin crew, meaning that they can keep more of those jobs in Australia. But exactly who provides what is an interesting question. Now during this video, I want you to guess which of these things are provided by Qantas and which are provided by Finnair. So you've got the airplane itself, then you've got the crew, then you've got the food that we'll be eating on board, then you've got everything that's being shown on the in-flight entertainment system, the headset that you'll be using to watch that in-flight entertainment, and things like the amenities kit that you'll be given in business class. See if you can guess who provides what from that list, but I will say it's not actually as obvious as you might first think. So Qantas's plan was to lease two Finnair A330-300s, which they started doing back in October 2023, operating the routes between Sydney and Singapore and Sydney and Bangkok. Now since 2023, those two A330s actually went down to one due to some tensions between staff and the airlines. But it's back up to two A330s now, again flying between here and Singapore and here in Bangkok. But Qantas are actually about to introduce a third A330, again leased through Finnair, but this one won't be a wet lease. It's actually going to be a dry lease, which I'll talk about a little bit later in this video. But what they're going to be doing with that A330 is actually repainting the whole thing with a Qantas livery. But it'll be interesting to have a Qantas livery on the outside and Finnair Business Class on the inside. We'll see what happens though. So I've just been spending the last hour or so here at Sydney International Airport. This is the Qantas First Class Lounge here in the International Terminal. Had some breakfast, had a coffee, had a juice. But before we jump on board, I want to introduce you to a new segment. Let's take a look at our journey from a pilot's perspective in the same time it will take me to install my Holofly eSIM for our destination as we go through today's flight plan. Now our flight plan will take us out of Sydney. We're going to be climbing via the Class C steps out to the west. We'll make our way through the heart of Australia just north of Alice Springs and out over the coastline somewhere between Darwin and Broome. And for the majority of this trip we're actually going to be within Brisbane's FIR or Flight Information Region. In fact we'll be talking to Australian air traffic control right up to the point we just get to Indonesia. That's huge coverage and not dissimilar to the huge coverage that Holofly gives you with more than 200 destinations covered. They also have regional eSIMs, so if you are travelling around multiple countries, you don't need to buy individual eSIMs for every single country you're going to. Simply get a regional eSIM and use the same one for your whole trip. Now, as we're heading west, we'll be flying on even flight levels, and with our fuel load, we'll probably start around 32,000 feet. And with the tailwinds we're expecting today, we should have good ground speeds of around 480 knots, something like 550 miles an hour. Now that is super fast, just like the speeds that you can expect from Holofly as you get unlimited data, no restrictions, and a fast and reliable internet connection without having to change your existing eSIM. Yes, that means you can even keep your existing WhatsApp number and make and receive calls the same as if you were in your home country. Today's weather en route looks pretty stable with the usual storms and build-ups around Singapore that you'd expect from a country that sits on the equator. But even if it's chucking it down when we get there, it's good to know that now my Holofly eSIM is installed on my phone. All I need to do is turn that line on when we touch down, and and I'll have fast, reliable data before I even get off my flight today. And you can save the next time you travel too. Use my special promo code STEPH747 and save money on your next eSIM when you buy with Holofly. Alright, time to leave the lounge and board our Finnair A3, well, our Qantas, but technically, well, our Finnair Qantas A330 to Singapore. Hello. Awesome, thank you very much.
Would you like a glass of champagne as well?
I'd love a glass of champagne, yes please. Thank you. Qantas Jammers from a Finnair crew member.
Flight of the day to Singapore is 8 hours and the flight should be smooth. And hope you all have a pleasant flight and see you again at the next time. Thank you.
Now, let me talk to you about this Finnair Business Class seat, because some of you might be familiar with the concept of it, but if not, it's very unique in one particular way, and that is that this business class seat doesn't have a mechanical recline. Some people love it, some people hate it, but I really like the fact that there is no mechanical recline. The one moving part it does have though is there is a button here and the middle part of the seat comes up and basically you've got your full flatbed. Now you might think, well then is it not very comfortable? Is it like a hard back? Well no, this is really soft. But on top of that, they give you so many pillows. That's one pillow, I've got another pillow, I've got a pillow down here as well for your back. So you can kind of make your own little nest. So who benefits? Like, whose best interest is this in? Is it Qantas or is it Finnair? Well, let's take Finnair to start with. So first of all, Finnair basically benefit because they get to use some of their equipment that they might otherwise not. Now, with the tensions going on between Russia and Ukraine at the moment, flying through Russian airspace is pretty limited for a Finnish-based operator like Finnair. So these A330s would otherwise not be being utilised as much as Finnair would want them to. So there's an immediate revenue benefit because Qantas are paying Finnair to use these A330s, which otherwise might have just been sitting on the ground. Then there's the wet part of the wet lease, which is the staff themselves. Now, Finnair were looking to have to furlough quite a few pilots over the last few years, but they're actually managing to keep them employed because of this wet lease arrangement with Qantas. And then Finnair also get the benefits of working closely with another One World partner, this being Qantas obviously in this case. So it keeps that relationship strong for any sort of future arrangements that the two of them might have. But then what about Qantas? Well, the clear benefit to Qantas is obviously they get instant capacity, just like that, without having to worry about getting new aircraft online, training new staff up, even things like maintenance and insurance overheads they don't have to worry about. All of those responsibilities lie with Finnair. There are no hiring costs for staff, there are no training costs for staff, there's no payroll tax, expenses, superannuation, all that stuff doesn't have to be paid by Qantas, and they can boost their capacity quickly in really popular routes like Australia to Singapore and Australia to Bangkok. So in this instance, I don't think there's like a clear winner here. I think it's pretty much a win-win situation for the airlines, but is there a loser? Or potentially is that the customer? Well, you still get all the benefits. Like, I mean, I actually paid points for this flight, so I'm not going to get my frequent flyer status, but had I paid cash for this flight, then you'd still get the same Qantas frequent flyer status credits and frequent flyer points that you would do if this aircraft had a kangaroo painted on the tail. But if you're used to the Qantas service, if you're used to the Qantas seating, if you don't like the Finnair seat, then potentially yes, there could be a downside to you as a customer. So we're about 30 minutes into the flight. I've just been served my kind of first beverage of the day. I made a stupid mistake on this flight as well. I will be totally honest. They came round and asked me what I wanted to have for lunch, and I said, well, I've got my vegan meal that I normally book on these flights. They said, we don't have a record of that. I thought, oh my God, here we go again. My meal's been forgotten about. But whilst we were taxiing on the ground, I actually checked in my Qantas app, and I could see that I hadn't put down that I needed a special meal for this flight. So my own stupid fault. So what the staff have done though, which is really good and a testament to Finnair, is that they've gone around the economy cabin, had a look at what's available in business class, gone through the menu and found a kind of like Frankenstein version of what could be a meal that I would be able to enjoy. So if you have got fussy dietary preferences like I do, and if you do forget to put them down, at least Finnair seem to look after you well. But knowing that, let me fill up on some nuts. The one thing I do really love about this seat though is next to you, if you do want to charge devices, there's a wireless charging pad, which I love these days because firstly it's really convenient, but secondly no wires and cables just all over the place. It's just much neater. You know how I was just saying how I love this seat because of the wireless charger? Well, it turns out the wireless charger doesn't work very well with my phone case. I've got a backup cable which I brought with me and I'm using that instead, which isn't bad at the end of the day. I prefer not to have a cable. As I enjoyed my main meal, and once again I was really appreciative to the staff for organising that for me, I got myself a coffee and decided just to settle in and watch a movie. I will be honest though, I was pretty distracted by the view out the window. I mean, it was a picture perfect day to fly across the desert today. Such clear and smooth skies flying across central Australia, and it really reminded me actually how much I miss doing this myself, albeit a lot lower down than we are right now, but in my own small plane flying across Australia and making that general aviation content for you here on this channel. I'll keep you updated obviously with what's happening with my medical. I still don't have it at the time of making this video, and that's why I'm doing a lot more of these commercial flights right now. But hopefully it's coming back soon, and when it does, yeah, I'm really excited to be down there, low level, sharing some brand new aviation adventures with you, flying around this brilliant country. Australia is so big. That's 4.5 hours of flying, and only now are we leaving the coastline of Australia behind. Now, Qantas, of course, they're not the only airline doing wet leasing. It's a relatively common practice in the airline industry. I wrote down a few examples of ones that you might have heard of. First of all, sticking with Qantas, Finnair aren't the only airline they wet lease aircraft through. In Australia, if you book some flights, I was booking a flight between Adelaide and Melbourne the other week, for example, and that was operated by Alliance Airlines. They fly the Embraer E190s on regional routes around Australia, but when you book that, you book through the Qantas website, just like you do with the Finnair flight here. Also, you've got in Europe Eurowings, who use Avion Express for some of their regional routes on the Airbus A320s. Also in Europe, you've got Swissair, who use Helvetic Air, using the Embraer E190s that Swissair otherwise wouldn't be able to operate because they don't have the resources to be able to do that. And then there's the question of damp leases, which I mentioned earlier on in this piece. So for wet leases, basically you pay another airline a fee and you get the aircraft and all the crew on board. If a dry lease is you pay an airline a fee and you only get the aircraft and you provide all the crew yourself. A damp lease, kind of, you can work it out, sits somewhere in the middle, and typically what you get is you lease the aircraft and the flight crew and potentially also some of the maintenance and operations crew from another airline, but you yourself provide things like the cabin crew, so the staff on board here who are looking after the passengers. And that can be done for a couple of reasons. Sometimes there are regulatory requirements that require you to do that in certain countries, but also sometimes it's done from a training perspective. So if you've got staff who are looking to get used to a new route, operating a new service which might not have existed up until this point, then you can do that by damp leasing the aircraft and the flight crew from another airline and train your cabin crew on that flight in a much more cost-effective way. For the next few hours on the flight, I watched a bit more of the in-flight entertainment system. I ordered my 4th coffee of the day, and I realised that the wireless charging pad, even though it wouldn't charge my phone, it would charge my AirPods. So I gave them a quick boost before getting to Singapore, and then started packing up my mess before we started our descent. So how many of these did you get right? What actually came from Qantas and what came from Finnair on this flight? Well, the airplane itself, obviously, that was Finnair. And the same, of course, goes for the crew as well. The food itself, well, that was provided by Qantas. Now, the in-flight entertainment system was an interesting one. Obviously, the software itself, that came from Finnair. But you would have seen when you watch movies on a plane that occasionally you have the airline's name as a watermark at the top of the screen. And in this instance, the watermark didn't say Finnair, it actually said Qantas. And also, interestingly, as you would have seen, the headset, that wasn't a Finnair headset, even though we're on a Finnair aircraft. The headset itself was also provided by Qantas. And the amenities kit, once again, that was Qantas. So even though this was a wet leased aircraft, not everything is provided by Finnair. It's a real mix of who is responsible for what, and not as clear cut as I originally thought it would be. It'll be interesting to see how things go with Qantas wet leasing these A330-300s, the 2 that they have at the moment, like I said, and the 3rd dry lease one that's coming online soon. Interesting to see how long they actually keep going with that before replacing it with their own product. I think for passengers like us, people who love aviation, I think it's a bit of an opportunity, to be honest. If you need to get between Australia and Southeast Asia into the bumpy skies of Singapore like we're coming into now, then why not book the Qantas flight that's wet lease operated by Finnair and try out a product that you might not otherwise get a chance to try. Always bumpy though coming into Singapore.
Hello everyone and welcome to Singapore. The local time is 5:23 p.m. On behalf of Qantas and oneworld, thank you for choosing to fly this flight operated by Finnair.
Don't forget to use that code STEPH747 to get money off your Holofly eSIM the next time you're travelling. Thanks to Holofly for sponsoring this video. Thanks to you as always for watching, and I'll see you on the next flight. Check out this next video right here. I think you'll really like this one. Thanks for watching.